start. Let's look at the final few acts of Midsummer Night's Dream. Hope you've managed to get through it and have enjoyed it. It's quite the play. Has anyone actually seen a film version of it yet, or watched one recently? I remember one a few years ago with Callista Flockhart and what was his name? Kevin Kline as Bottom. The problem is he's too good looking. The characters, this problem with Hollywood actors in general, they look too good. You don't want, like, people don't look, Bottom needs to be an unattractive figure. He can't be appealing in any way. That's, and I'm afraid Hollywood actors are never unattractive, so it doesn't work very well. Anyway, never mind. So I think we left off in Act 3 with some comments about how Bottom and Titania, so the lowest of characters, the basest of characters, the most carnal of characters, Bottom, suitably named, had been connected through this use of Diane's bud rubbed on her eyelids by this mischievous Puck figure, fallen in love with Bottom, and Bottom, of course, was happy to be in love with her. And I noted that this in no ways ennobled Bottom in spite of that. So he's been wedded to the most elevated of all the creatures, the Queen of the Fairies, and yet he has not been brought up to her height. He is just as ridiculous as he ever was. But she has been degraded in the process. And I made some sort of comment on how all attempts at reducing the natural excellences in nature always end up degrading nature. They never end up in the elevation of everyone. They simply reduce what is excellent. And that's the history of egalitarian politics, in my opinion. And in life and in education, for that matter, equality is not something for the classroom. You don't go to become more equal. You go to become better. You pay money to be better. You don't go to be equal. And that's part of gardening. It's part of culture. You cultivate in order to bring fruitfulness, and excellent things will arise out of it. The fruits and also the flowers of human nature. So there's something in that, and I say that as I guess a political commentary on my part, but even just a commentary on the play as a play about the mind. Because I said that really this weird play, because it is in the comedies, it's an odd sort of play. Although several of the comedies are like this. He's commenting he's not just trying to entertain us, he's trying to teach us. And what he's teaching us about is about human nature and about education and about the right relation of people and our right relation to nature, the right understanding of reason and its relation to the passions, and how both the passions and reason can lead us astray. We began with an overly rational Athens condemning a young lady to death simply because she didn't want to marry the man her father chose, and he being willing to put her to death for not following his commands, which is an outrageous state of affairs. That's how it began. So reason, yes, is entirely reason, entirely lawful, and yet it's in some ways gone to seed. And now they've been put into the forest where the imagination runs wild, where the passions run wild, and all manner of craziness ensues. And there's a threat of doom there as well. So it began with the threat of death in Athens. There's a threat of death here in the forest as well. Things can go terribly astray. And in the midst of all that, and as I say, at the pinnacle of this play in Act 3, which it's always in Act 3, there's an attempted resolution of the crisis, and here it's the Oberon who repeatedly has to interfere and intervene, and he is what we're going to talk about repeatedly in Shakespeare's plays. I'll mention it here for the first time, but we will find that in all of the plays we will see a figure like this, He is a surrogate for the playwright. He is what we will call a dramaturge figure. Represents the playwright himself. Somebody who tries to orchestrate events so that the actors do what the playwright wants them to do. And in that sense, the figure of Puck is, I don't know if he's an anti-playwright figure. I don't think he is. But he's a chaotic figure. He brings about only discord. That's his nature. And he does so particularly in areas where there can be reasoning does not function. In the forest, in other words, where the imagination runs wild, where hearing is heightened. I'm told that if you are blind, there's compensation for this in the sense that your ability to hear is enhanced. And I'm not sure. I'm sure if I knew anything about human physiology, there's probably an explanation for how the brain prioritizes seeing over other senses. And when you lose that, then your auditory capacities are enhanced. I do know that if you're in a coma, your hearing does not go. You might not be able to see, but you can hear. Can't speak, but you can hear. And so it's a terrifying thing. People are talking about you as if you can't hear because you can't speak and you can't show any stimulus in a sense of responding, but you're well able to hear everything they're saying. As terrible as it is as well, because it tends not to be great things either. Well, what shall we do now? And suddenly the heartbeat's going up. I wonder why the heartbeat went up when we decided whether we're going to pull the plug. Yes.
You can also dream while you're talking.
Yes.
Your eyes do enter REM.
Yeah, there's this, yeah.
That flickering back and forth is.
So all these things, I mean, these are going astray from the subject here, but it's pointing out that in the dark, it's not that your sensory capacities are gone. It's that your hearing takes over, and so does the imagination. It runs wild. There's nothing to limit it. Reason is a limiting power in some ways. It forces you to focus upon things. By the way, the human eye only fully develops in the 7th year, which is why young children don't concentrate very well. Their eyes have not yet set in such a way that they're ready for learning. This is why early childhood education before that is slightly ridiculous. That was called understatement. Slightly. It's not slightly ridiculous, it's just plain ridiculous. It's not education, really. It's not that nothing goes on, but it's not actually education. In the 7th year, grade 1, it's called grade 1 for a reason. Now you're at the bottom of the stage of learning. There are other agendas there before that. So they're in the forest. It's in a place of chaos. Up to this point, all of Oberon's attempts to orchestrate as the dramaturge figure, and remember, a figure that much like Shakespeare himself, to try and fix things or bring about action in accordance with what he wishes, have been thwarted by his little accomplice, Puck. And there's an element of humor to it, but there's also an element of potential catastrophe there. And it will not be resolved until remember I talked about 2 types of the imagination. One just operating in accordance with the passions, in which really is unruly, there's no harmony. That's what we see in Act 3, Scene 1, when Bottom and Titania are wedded. This is not a good outcome. This is also not what Oberon wants. He doesn't want to lose his wife, although he's willing to humiliate her in order to acquire this child, which I find rather perverse, but never mind. So is her desire to have somebody else's child. That's also perverse. But so this is not a good situation, and it shows how the diseased or the imagination that's led by the passions is not going to resolve the problem. What then we need is the view of the imagination which I presented in the first class, which is the reconciling imagination that reconciles the reasoning power with our bodies, with our desires, and they're wedded so that harmony ensues, so that the mind is satisfied and the bodies are fulfilled, and that can happen. And Now in another view of the imagination is presented. So those two, but at this point it's just the chaotic imagination. It's the same imagination that leads you to think that every noise in the dark is a monster. It's your fears. And sin enters into the framework there as well, of course. But this is a degradation, back to my point, of Titania, and it demonstrates how eros, that is plain lust, brings out the animalistic side of man, and it overcomes reason and our godlike nature, because reasoning is the power that distinguishes mankind from all the other creatures. So Titania, although she continues to speak in noble tones, falls prey to lust, and that's demonstrated, and the absurdity of it is demonstrated by the fact that she loves this donkey, the head of the donkey on Bottom. Now, Bottom's speech, let me come to that. Any comments or questions about that before I do proceed? And I'm skipping over a great deal here, I know that, but of necessity, just simply because of the time constraints I'm under. No? Okay. In Act 4, Scene 1 then, when Bottom comes to speak. So Act 4, Scene 1, enter Queen of Fairies, Titania, and Clown, Bottom, and the fairies, and then they're listed as well. And then Oberon is behind them, unseen. So he is like, again, like the playwright, he is orchestrating events, but he himself is not appearing on the stage. And Shakespeare loved doing this. He's reflecting on what art does in relating to nature. And this is a great theme of literature in general, but Shakespeare and the Renaissance are very keenly aware and interested in what is the right relation of art to nature. It's a Christian doctrine that grace perfects nature. It's also a Christian understanding that the mankind in the garden was given a mandate to exercise dominion over the Garden of Eden, to make Eden spread out from the little place in which they were, so that it encompassed the whole earth. They're going to be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth, bring it under your dominion. That means to take a good thing and make it better. So you can take a tree and you can cultivate it and make a better tree. You can graft one tree branch into another apple tree and you make a better form of fruit. That was Adam and Eve's natural mandate. This is even before the fall. Right? So remember, be fruitful and multiply and bring it under your dominion is something that was stated before the fall. It's not a consequence of the fall. Work is not a consequence of the fall. Neither is bringing things under your dominion. It's not a consequence of the fall. So this says something about creation care, which I think we just heard something about. The right relation of mankind to nature is that nature, we understand it as God's creation, but as our call to take care of it. And taking care of it means taking control over it, not letting it run wild. That's a romantic view. It's not a biblical view. You hear sometimes when people talk about creation care, the best thing we could ever do is stop having babies so that the our carbon footprints, what a perverse phrase that is, would stop oppressing the earth. This is from a lie that comes straight from hell. That's not the right relation. Actually, if anybody knows anything about the natural world, if you let nature be natural, it goes wild. The predators remove their prey, and bad things, disease ensues and so forth. So it's the right relation of mankind and nature to actually hunt carefully, not hunt out of existence, but take care of, to keep the population down, etc. I'll get off that stump. But that is the understanding here. So here she comes in, and he is in the background. Now, what we're learning here, Shakespeare is learning by demonstrating it through the figure of Oberon, is how to get things wrong as a playwright as well. How can you get things wrong? And as I say, the right relation of art to nature. Now, art, which in the sense of artifice. Now, when we think of artifice in our day, we think of artificial, and it's held as a antithesis to nature. Would you like the natural product, or would you like the artificial one? Who wants the artificial food that I'm going to give them? Not a person, right? Nobody wants the artificial. Ingredients, you all want all natural. Well, poison is a natural thing, right? So it's just because it's natural doesn't mean that it's good for you. And just because it has been subject to artifice, that is cultivation, doesn't mean it's bad for you. What is the right relation? This is something that is discussed and debated throughout history, really. And there is a classical ideal for it. There's a balance there. There's a right way of doing it, but there is disagreement on that. And you can see that in the differing views of gardens even. Look at an English garden, compare it and contrast it to a French garden or an Italian garden or a Greek garden. You ever seen Greek gardens? The Greeks have never met a tree that they didn't like to put in a pot. That tree is growing out of the ground. How dare it? We'll stick it in a pot. There's the tree. Right? So, but that reflects a view of art and nature. We're going to take control over nature and control it in some way, and it's still living, but it's not going to overcome the natural world. Whereas the English view of gardens looks a bit like it's gone wild. A little bit. And not quite. You're actually clipping and pruning and so forth, but it looks a little bit overrun. That's an English view of gardening. Well, that's the right relation of art to nature. It still looks pretty natural. In France and in Spain and in Italy, it looks more artificial. So the trees are equidistant. Same height, same shape, heavily manicured. Appears a little bit too artificial to English sensibilities, and vice versa. But again, it's expressing something about that relation between mankind and nature there. And to some degree, it's a matter of taste, but it is a matter of philosophy then. It really is. So all of that, go back to the scene here. Oberon is sitting in the background, and he is watching what ensues, because up to this point, he's just let Puck do things, and he's only messed things up. So now Oberon is going to sit in the background and make sure he doesn't do any more screw-ups. So enter Titania. Come, sit thee down upon this flowery bed, while I thy amiable cheeks do coy, and stick musk roses in thy sleek, smooth head, and kiss thy fair large ears, my gentle joy. Note she's speaking in rhyme. Where's Peach Blossom? This is Bottom. Ready? Scratch my head, Peach Blossom. Where's Monsieur Cobweb? Ready? Monsieur Cobweb, good monsieur, get you your weapons in your hand and kill me a red-hipped humblebee on the top of a thistle. And, good monsieur, bring me the honey bag. Do not fret yourself too much in the action, monsieur, and, good monsieur, have a care the honey bag break not. I would be loath to have you overflowen with a honey bag, monsieur. Where's monsieur Mustard Seed? Ready, give me your neef, monsieur. These words that he's using. A red-hipped humblebee, he means a bumblebee. The neef, there's no such thing as a neef. He's using words, he's sounding like the lady to whom he's wed. He's trying to speak with eloquence. Everything he says is absurd and ridiculous. So if you didn't understand exactly what he was saying, it didn't make any sense. It makes no sense. Note also even how it's written on the page. She is writing in verse. His lines are running into the next. He is not elevated. He's putting on airs of being like her. He is not. He's just as much a doofus as he always was. So it's inarticulate speech. He cannot describe the feelings of an animal. Is the form of reasoning without the capacity for reasoning. So he's parodying poetry itself. when it is lacking reasoning. So these are words, but there is no rhyme or reason to them. Literally, no rhyme or reason. So Bottom even confuses his senses, and so he cannot express himself at all. These are words, but not anything more than that. So again, this leads us to into the idea that Shakespeare is trying to convey to the reader, the borderline between the world of dreams and the world of reason. This whole Act 4. There is a borderline there where dreaming seems to be of better things, which is a rational thing. In Plato, when Plato is thinking about the realm of ideas, he's thinking about an ideal realm. It's almost like a dream. And it's many have noted that many of Plato's dialogues, when he's given a rational defense of goodness or justice or beauty, he will conclude with some sort of story which will articulate this, almost a dreamlike sequence. And we have that here. And that is really what Shakespeare's view of the imagination does. It shows us not the way things are, but the way they ought to be, and the way we long for them to be. Remember, Shakespeare would agree with the Christian tradition that God created the world out of love, and that our heart's desire is for God, which we misplace in objects, but ultimately it is for God. And our hearts are restless until they rest in Him. And that restlessness, which is only met by God, is symbolized by marriage. And so the comedy will conclude with marriages that symbolize that union between people and God, the bride and the bridegroom. And that's where we're going with all comedies. But sometimes it's a little messier than others. And in general it is a little farcical, potential for tragedy, which is basically like the way life is. Even when you're married, it's like sometimes you're on a roller coaster and you're like, oh, it's like threatening to derail there. And whoa, that was a little bit close. And back on, down, oh, there, dip and turn. So there's a conflict, and the conflicts now in Act 4 are repeating and to some sense intensifying, and in each case they are resolved through reason. But this is in the forest still, where reason does not hold sway. And Diane's bud at this point, with Oberon in the background, is now using it correctly in order to fix problems and not to create more problems. Note that Puck, who had no reasoning behind his actions, only created more problems, more chaos. So it's not the mere chastity which is going to solve the problem. And note that theme of chastity, because that was almost a threat at the outset. Remember? Hermia could go into the nunnery and experience fruitless life from the perspective of the Duke. You could have spent your life in fruitless living. But there's a higher sort of chastity, which is being wedded to God, being devoted to God. And that is what Shakespeare is also. So there are two types of chastity, just like two types of the imagination. One is just sterility and fruitless life. But then there's also a life devoted to God of true chastity, which you can experience actually even in marriage. It's faithfulness, devotion. You don't have to be without sex to be chaste. It's associated with virginity, but it's not exclusive of virginity. You can also be in marriage and faithful to your spouse, and yet in your heart unfaithful. They recognize this, Shakespeare's age. So it's not, when Diane's bud is applied here, and I think it's line 74. I'll read that again. Oberon advancing at this point with Robin Goodfellow. I won't read the entirety of the sequence because it's lengthy here. But she says, when I had at my pleasure taunted her, that's line 57, and she in mild terms begged my patience, I then did ask of her changeling child, her changeling child, which straight she gave me, and her fairy sent to bear him to my bower in fairy land. And now I have the boy, I will undo this hateful imperfection of her eyes. And gentle Puck, take this transformed scalp from off the head of this Athenian swain, that he, awaking when the other do, may all to Athens back again repair, and think no more of this night's accidents, but as the fierce vexation of a dream. But first I will release the fairy queen, touching her eyes. Be as thou wast wont to be, see as thou wast wont to see. Dian's bud or Cupid's flower hath such force and blessed power. So note, it's over Cupid's flower. So love has not been erased. It has been enhanced. So now there's a chaste love between them, a fitting love, an appropriate love. Now, my Titania says, wake you, my sweet queen. My Oberon, she says, what visions have I seen? Methought I was enamored of an ass. There lies your love. How came these things to pass? Oh, how mine eyes do loathe his visage now. Silence a while. Robin take off his head. Titania, music, call and strike more dead than common sleep of all these 5 the sense. Music, oh, music, such as charmeth sleep. Now the music ensues. Now music is seen as a divine thing, by the way. So let me brief comment on music here. Shakespeare understands music as earthly music as an anticipation of heavenly music. Remember in the book of Revelation we're told that there are singing. The angels and archangels and all the company of heaven sing of the Lord God Almighty and his Christ. And they sing his praises. Now that celestial music, which is happening even now as we speak, we participate in when we sing, but we don't hear that music, but it's going on. It's a music that is beyond this world, but it's echoed by this world. This is the theory of the day. And the reason that we hear harmony in music and take delight in it is it anticipates that celestial music, which is anticipated in the way the whole cosmos is set up. And they call it the music of the spheres. I won't take too long to indulge in that here. I talked about this at greater length when I was speaking about John Milton's Ode on the Morning of Christ's Nativity last year in the Milton class. And I would go into it at length now, but I'm not going to get through the play if I do that. But if you're interested, it is on my YouTube channel, so you could have a look at that, and I talk about it in detail. But the music here is a sign that harmony is ensuing finally. Up to this point, there's discord. Now there will be concord. Dissonance. What is worse than somebody who sings out of tune? Just tone deaf and grating noises. But now the music is beautiful and, as she says, charmeth sleep. And so reason is being restored. So Dian's bud is now no longer erasing things and creating chaos. It's now there to enhance. This is the good use of the imagination. This is the right use of chastity. This is the right use of reasoning. So everything at this point is being put right by the dramaturge figure, who now steps out from behind the stage and is intervening, fixing things. So it's at the point when he has got the child. I have no idea why they want the child to begin with, but that's not asked, it's not answered. It just is, that's what fairies do, I guess. And as I say, the line 155, a few lines on here, interesting comment from Aegeus. Now, this is back, remember, Theseus and Hippolyta and Aegeus and all his train has gone into the forest to find his daughter. And I will pick up the conversation there a bit. Because now she encounters, or they encounter rather, the sleeping lovers, and Theseus speaks, 142. I pray you all, stand up. I know you two are rival enemies. How comes this gentle concord in the world? That hatred is so far from jealousy to sleep by hate, and fear no enmity. Lysander. My lord, I shall reply amazedly, half sleep, half waking, but as yet, I swear, I cannot truly say how I came here. But as I think, for truly would I speak, and now I do bethink me, so it is. I came with Hermia hither. Our intent was to be gone from Athens, where we might, without the peril of the Athenian law, now Aegeus says, you've come here to avoid me, and he can't help himself. Enough, enough, my lord, you have enough. I beg the law upon his head. They would have stolen away, they would, Demetrius, thereby to have defeated you and me, you of your wife, and me of my consent that she should be your wife. Now Demetrius responds to him, my lord, fair Helen told me of their stealth. Of this their purposes hither to this wood, and I in fury hither followed them. Fair Helena in fancy following me. But my good lord, I wot not by what power, but by some power it is, my love to Hermia, melted as the snow, seems to me now as the remembrance of an idle god. God in the sense of a trick, it's a trifle, which in my childhood I did dote upon, and all the faith, the virtue of my heart, the object and the pleasure of mine eye, is only Helena. To her, my lord, was I betrothed ere I saw Hermia, but like a sickness did I loathe this food, but as in health come to my natural taste, now I do wish it, love it, long for it, and will forevermore be true to it. Theseus now, seizing the opportunity. Fair lovers, you are fortunately met. Of this discourse we more will hear anon. Aegeus, I will overbear your will. For in the temple, by and by, with us these couples shall eternally be knit. And for the morning now is something worn. Our purposed hunting shall be set aside. Away with us to Athens. 3 and 3 will hold a feast in great solemnity. Come, Hippolyta. Now this word solemnity, it means with a great deal of, C.S. Lewis talks about this word in Preface to Paradise Lost, because we've lost the sense of solemnity. Reverence. There are solemn occasions when it's appropriate to be both joyous and in awe. And that confluence of these things we rarely experience, because joy is usually like children having had too much sugar, screaming and bouncing, and that's. But when God's work is at hand, which is the sense here, and there's both joy and a sense of reverence and awe, that's what solemnity is. And this is the marriage. The 3 will be wed on the same day. And there's a work here that Theseus recognizes is divine work. So that's the sense here, I think. So he invokes the old law of Athens, Aegeus, but Theseus overrules him, and now the law of love prevails in Athens. So now it's not just that the lovers' quarrel is being resolved, Athens itself is being brought under the law of love. And the old law that he had invoked will no longer apply. Now, if you wish, you could see it as a Christian take on love. Remember, love perfects the law. There's the old covenant and the new covenant. Right? And we will look at that theme more closely when we come to Measure for Measure, because that's all about that. But I think this play is also, to some degree, meditating on that. But as I say, it's definitely in Measure for Measure, which we shall look at next class. But the lovers are now ruled by reason, and their reasoning is ruled by love, but not lust. Love, which is reasonable, which produces only concord and peace. So the question is, have the lovers actually undergone any significant enlightenment? They're harmonious, but have they actually become more peaceable individuals, more loving individuals? Or are they simply, everything's fixed, but they are essentially the same as they were before? Well, their lives are more richer, for sure. Yes, but
the girls both, they talk, well, I've seen with a double I, or however they said it, the girls are the ones who are like, wait a minute, something was messed up here.
Yes, although, so you take the double, so where's that line? I don't think the double I is seen in a negative sense.
190, I found Demetrius like a jewel, my own and not mine own. And just before that, well, Hermia says, methinks I see things with parted eye when everything seems double. And then Helena says,
excellent.
Methinks, and I found Demetrius like a jewel, my own and not mine own.
Right.
So doesn't that sort of imply that she's like, wait, something's gone on here?
Something gone on. I think you could interpret it the way I think you took it, as a sign of dissatisfaction. I think it's more of a sense of something greater has happened here than I can understand. They're expressing their amazement. So how did this happen? They're mystified by it, and they're expressing what Shakespeare is seeking to express here as a Renaissance dramatist, that the imagination has the capacity to reconcile things that reasoning alone will not. Reasoning will separate truth from falsehood, but it won't bring opposing warring parties to agree to settle their differences. Whereas the reconciling power of the imagination can do that, if it's rightly motivated, not by the lower view of the imagination, but that of love, which the higher view of the imagination does, and which Shakespeare thinks that art can do. And it's his job as an artist to take fallen human nature, which tends towards the base, motivated only by the passions, the appetites, and gets it to focus instead on what is pure, beautiful, lovely. Think on these things: whatever is pure, whatever is beautiful, whatever is lovely, whatever is good, whatever is in any way noble. Think on these things. That's what they're doing now. And that is not their work, that's the work of God in their midst. Now note that when I say this, God is not cited by the characters. It's some mysterious power. It's the power that the artist himself is wielding through his artistry. And Shakespeare regards it as something that is given to him as a gift, and at the same time it exercises a power beyond his. Anyway, further question or comment?
I was just thinking that, like, then later, like, even Hippolytus is like, that's weird.
Yes. Well, they're all astonished by it, because it's happened outside the control of any of the human figures. Remember, it's the fairies that worked this.
Yeah.
And it could not have happened in Athens. Even Theseus had no power to work it in Athens. He gave them a little bit of an escape route. You could go into the nunnery and not be subject to death, which the strict rule of the law would require. His aegis is correct. This is what it stated. Well, he's given him a little bit of he's given her a little bit of wiggle room. But that was all he could do. He couldn't fix the problem. She's gone into the forest. The forest didn't fix the problem either. The fairies did, with Dian's bud rightly applied. It was wrongly applied by the figure of Bottom, who brought about discord. So you can make things work through magic and get things wrong, or you can wish things rightly applied when the dramaturge comes in and does it well, properly. Now union results, and concord and peace and love. So that intervention of Oberon, once he's finally got his wishes with this little changeling, the child, now he intervenes and brings about the harmony that will result in the 3 marriages at the end. Does that make sense? I think that's what Shakespeare is trying to portray here at any rate. And my task, I see as a professor, is simply to help you to appreciate Shakespeare's work. I'm not trying to, this is not I don't have an agenda here. I think this is what Shakespeare is thinking, and I'm thinking there's textual support for it. So now the lovers are not ruled by their passions, which resulted in enmity and discord and hatred, and they're so much so that they're struck. I mean, as again, Theseus, I know you two are rival enemies. How comes this gentle concord? How is it possible? You're lying beside one another asleep, and not one is not worried the other is going to stick a knife in his back. How is this possible? Theseus can't understand it. But it is so. So the lovers' lives have become richer. They realize that there is a new way of looking at the world which will unite them even with their rivals. And now they, and note that when he said this, by the way, when Demetrius speaks, he says that he loves, before his love for Hermia was like a fancy, like a god. He just he went after a little shiny thing. But now it's back to what he initially loved, which was Helena. And he says it's natural. So artifice has led him to nature, what he ought to have loved. Because remember, Hermia is short and dark. I guess probably not very attractive either. That's probably a good way of portraying it on the stage. You wouldn't want to be the actress chosen to play that part, I guess, if that was the case. And then you never see that because people who act tend to be attractive. Not always so. But Helena is supposed to be a tall, blonde beauty. So he would naturally fall for her, I guess. And he did. And then he took a fancy for Hermia for some reason. And he's like, what was I thinking? And I've been set right. So they've become richer. They've recognized the way things ought to be, which is the way nature made them to be. And they love the way nature is now. So it's not, when I say there's a supernatural intervention, it's not contrary to nature. It's in accordance with nature. It's the way nature should have led them to love anyway. But now there's also a change in Theseus, the king. He overrules the law of his own society. Says, this is unreasonable. It is Athenian law, but I am going to overrule it. By what power does he do so? Well, it's not clear. I don't know how the Athenian constitution exactly works. Remember, this is not really Athens, but he, as the sovereign, says this is going to change. States it as an edict right there. There's been no democratic process. It hasn't gone through committees and subcommittees. It hasn't been mangled by that terrible monstrosity called a committee, which makes horses into camels. He overrules the laws of society. And he grants the law of love, which he previously said was beyond his power. I have no power to do anything about this. This is the law of Athens. I must impose it. Now he does not. There's political freedom outside the legislative process. In our day, politicians are shackled by lawyers. They appeal to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says you've acted illegally. The prime ministers and politicians who themselves tend to be trained lawyers say, oh, okay, I'll get back in my cage. Sorry for stepping out of line. At one point, not that long ago in my lifetime, not in yours, politicians would have said, tough. You've overstepped your bounds as judiciary. I was elected by the people to do their will. There's a conflict there, of course. And you would not do this willy-nilly just because you're empowered to do so, just because you have power. It would be tyrannous. So this is the question then. When a ruler chooses to do something, how does he distinguish tyranny from proper rule? How would you distinguish it? Both are acts of will. This is a pure act of will on Theseus's part. Do we see it as tyrannous, or do we see it as good leading? I think we see it as good leading. What's the principle then? Love, concord, social harmony. Who is he obeying in doing this? God. The rule of love which he himself was taught. Here it's not explicitly invoked. Remember, this is an English pagan festival, although it's for the Earl of Southampton and his nephew, I believe. But in Measure for Measure, it will be explicitly Christian, and the same thing is taught there. And we have another dramaturge figure, watch for him, in Measure for Measure. So the patriarchal power has actually been increased by Oberon in Theseus and decreased in the figure of Aegeus. Aegeus is patriarchal power which simply insists on its privilege. Where now it's rightly used. Note that he's not banished patriarchy. The patriarch ought to be ruled by something higher than itself. He's not got rid of authority. He has enhanced it and righted it. Fascinating speech. That comments or questions on that? Whenever anybody supports patriarchy, that they should duck in our day, but I'm not going to duck. I'm saying just what Shakespeare says. It's my security. No, let me go to Act 5, Scene 1 then, because Theseus is going to summarize and add to the lessons that have been taught about the power of imagination. So to answer my question, have the characters undergone any significant enlightenment? The answer is clearly yes. So it's not just that relationships have been resolved, the discord's been resolved, that people are brought to a unity and love one another. They've also learned a lesson in this. And here Shakespeare expresses in his characters his view of what the imagination and the Renaissance dramatist should be doing. It's to teach people to think more clearly and to act better. So it is the artist then can better society, not simply entertain it. Sir Philip Sidney, and if you're doing my History of Lit Theory course, we'll come to this, said that we are to teach, Chaucer said the same thing, but to teach and delight. Those twin aims. Teach and delight. To teach and to delight. Not just to delight, but also to teach. And in fact, I will add to it, an artist always does both. Always, even if they don't think that they're teaching. If an artist thinks he isn't teaching, he's just not in control of what he's doing, and he is actually teaching. He may be teaching that there's no rhyme or reason for why things happen. That is a form of teaching. You're teaching people that things just happen. Happens often in our day. But this speech by Theseus, let me go to it. This is right at the outset here. Hippolyta, so the queen, remember the Amazons, and Theseus speak. Hippolyta says, "'Tis strange, my Theseus, that these lovers speak of." Theseus, "More strange than true. I never may believe these antic fables, nor these fairy toys. Lovers and madmen have such seething brains, such shaping fantasies that apprehend more than cool reason ever comprehends. The lunatic, the lover, and the poet are of imagination all compact. One sees more devils than vast hell can hold. That is the madman. The lover, all is frantic, sees Helen's beauty in a brow of Egypt. The poet's eye, in a fine frenzy rolling, doth glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven, and as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them to shapes, and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. Such tricks hath strong imagination, that if it would but apprehend some joy, it comprehends some bringer of that joy. Or in the night, imagining some fear, how easy is a bush supposed of bear. Hippolyta's response to her skeptical husband, but all the story of the night told over, and all their minds transfigured so together, more witnesseth than fancy's images, and grows to something of great constancy, but howsoever strange and admirable. So I take this as Hippolyta correcting her husband. He's still dismissing the power of the imagination. These three individuals, the lunatic, the lover, the poet, they're all given over to the imagination, and it's more or less the same thing. So even then, he has not quite learned his lesson. His wife has, and she corrects him, and she has the last word on this. But all the story of the night told over, and all their minds transfigured, so together more witnesseth than fancy's images. You're wrong, husband. And grows to something of great constancy, but howsoever strange and admirable. So the poet, in her understanding, has a power, a higher power, that will than that of the lunatic and the lover. He will be able to give form to things unknown and unseen, and they had been unknown and unseen amongst these couples. So Theseus, as a ruler, is critical of the power of the poet, and to some degree he's expressing the view of Athens towards the poets ever since Plato. The poets always lie. They imagine things that aren't there. They are pleasing images, but they're not truthful. And she says, but you see the evidence of the work here. How can you dispute this? There's a concord here. And that comes out of the forest. And she, Hippolyta, on the other hand, expresses the Neoplatonic view of poetry. It's a kind of divine madness that worketh concord. So, at this point, the play ensues, the commoner's play. Now, here we will witness something that in royal circles they will call noblesse oblige. N-O-B-L-E-E. That is, he allows the commoners to fulfill their duties as subjects. They want to put on a play. The play is ridiculous. They are offering to the king their praise, just like the little drummer boy. He has an offering for the king. That's the best he can bring. It's a ridiculous play. He appreciates what they're offering for what it is. It's genuine. And he judges it graciously for that reason. But he is condescending. Condescension only has negative connotations in our day, but here it's not. It's an element of grace. After all, God himself condescended to become a man, and therefore we condescend to be delighted in our children's praises, our children's little plays, and not laugh at them for their inability to speak the lines properly or sing on key or whatever, right? So that's what is going on here. Now, he allows them to fulfill their duties as subjects, thereby expressing that he remains sovereign. He's receiving the praise. So there's a meta-dramatic element here in the play, a play within the play. So the Theseus receiving the play invites the audience to think of themselves and what they're doing. What are they doing? They're watching a play. And to some degree, he's putting the audience in the position of the king. As the king was gracious in receiving this ridiculous pageant, you too be gracious and be taught about how to receive praise, to receive teaching. So there's an illusion of theater. Remember, if you think about it, for a short space of time, in the dark, the lights go out, the stage is in front of you, life ensues, you have to forget where all the other cares and concerns, and you see life happening in front of you. You recognize that there's artifice going on. It's your job to look away from the artifice and not be distracted by it, or understand that the poet needs artifice in order to do what he has to do. So it's what the Romantic poet John Keats calls the willing suspension of disbelief. You have to suspend. You can't sit there and criticize during the play. It's nothing worse than sitting with somebody who's doing that during the midst of it, or a movie. Put hand on the mouth. Enough. You have to get into it. You just forget all of that stuff. So there's an illusion of theater. The strategy of conspicuous artifice is here. He is forefronting the artifice, and it's particularly evident when the play is done badly, as it is here. It's terrible. It's a terrible play. And the audience will be laughing, of course, and it is actually extremely funny, the play within the play here. But now we're with the lower characters, who we're laughing at, not in the sense that we despise them, but in the sense that we are delighting in their limitations, but we're not regarding them as subhuman. The sort of thing that happens in Downton Abbey. Right? There's a place for the aristocrats to look after the people on their estate, and for them to take delight in the oversight over them. But my Lord Grantham, he looks after me. He sees it as his duty to look after them, right? He has to find a place for them. He has to take care of their needs. He should take delight in they've offered this, and it's not up to his standards, but guess what? It's the best they can offer. And they take great delight in participating in his life. And that the result of that is social concord. Yes?
In the show, when Lord Grantham experiences economic trouble, his first thought isn't what his status will be, it's his family.
Yeah.
His second thought is the people that he employs.
Yeah, of course.
Not any
No, but he's portrayed as an excellent aristocrat. Like, he's a great example of the aristocracy, right? He could have portrayed a corrupt aristocracy, of which you would have had ample examples as well. But we admire him. He acts as if an aristocrat really would do. My only critique of that series is that there's no element of God in the context, which makes it historically inaccurate. Like in the early 20th century, that would have been a significant part. There would have been chapel services daily. That would have been a part of any estate, and a man who looked after and took care for his the people on his estate, he would be guided by that, and it would have been a part of his daily routine. And so that's the thing that's missing there. And it doesn't work without it, I would add further. But, which the 20th century also demonstrates. Remove God from any context and what chaos ensues. But he lets the true audience, now the true audience is the audience, Shakespeare has a mixed audience out there. Some of them are not going to not accept what has been taught them there, but some will be changed by it. And his true audience, which is mixed in with all the others who've paid their same fare to get in there, will see the faults of the play, which he has allowed them to see, and they will be gracious in their response. And he's teaching them something about that. There are faults. There are faults that make you angry with people, or find faults. It's the better part to overlook those faults. And he does that through the play, and he's teaching them something about life in general. Right? The log and the beam and all that sort of thing. So so their belief in the illusion of the play as a whole is reinforced by seeing the faults of the play within the play, of which there are, as I say, it's just slapstick stuff. So that there are changes in character that we see here from the use of the imagination, which leads people to be more gracious in their reception of others. So Theseus, who's been tortured through delayed sexual gratification, he's been waiting, this Amazon whom he's conquered, he had to wait 3 days, and now, okay. Waiting the consummation of his marriage, that which we began the play with has now been replaced by art. Art has replaced eros, so lust has been replaced by love. It's not that there will be no sexual consummation, it's that he is now motivated by something more than mere domination. And at the outset, it just looked like that. She's the queen, he beat her, now he's going to marry her. Marry her, great. She probably looked sullen like a beaten woman at that outset. You could present, if you were, remember when I'm talking about this, you have to think the way an actor would think, how are we going to play this? And this would be a discussion point. The director would say, think about your role. Hippolyta, you're an Amazon. That means you're regal. However, you're defeated. What sort of man would defeat you, and how does he act? And think not only of how you'd be at the outset, but how you're going to be, and you're going to want to show an evolution in your character. How are you going to portray that on stage? How will you stand? How will you speak? How will you relate to those you're speaking to, and vice versa? All of those things. And all of those things will allow the play to be a play and work in a way that the mere reading does not do. Let me come to the final appearance. Comments or questions on that? I want to come to the final sequence. I'm going to skip over all this burlesque farce of a play. Sorry. Because the wall speaks even. Characters being the wall. Years ago, we put this on, Tyndale students put on this play. And the lion and the wall stole the show. Which they have almost no role, right? But they acted it up, and it was hilarious. Absolutely hilarious.
I like the line, well-moused lion.
Well-moused lion, yes. And again, the aristocrats are, you can tell they're amused, and they're talking about how bad the play is without speaking slightingly. They are genuinely laughing. They're laughing not only at what's being played, but misplayed. The misplays are funnier than the actual attempts at humor, which are terrible. It's the failures that are funny, like watching small children. So let me come then to the conclusion of that sequence, line 355. And the question comes from bottom. And Theseus says, moonshine and lion are left to bury the dead. Demetrius, aye, and wall too. Bottom starting up. No, I assure you, the wall is down that parted their fathers. Will it please you to see the epilogue? Or to hear a bergamasque dance? Now, he's misplaced the verbs there. He would hear the epilogue and see the dance. But of course, forever, Bottom is mixing up his words, even to the very end. Would you like to hear a bergamasque dance between two of our company? Theseus, okay, no epilogue, I pray you, for your play needs no excuse. Never excuse. For when the players are all dead, there need none to be blamed. Marry, if he that writ it had played Pyramus, and hanged himself in Thisbe's garter, it would have been a fine tragedy. And so it is, truly and very notably discharged. But come, your bergamasque, let your epilogue alone. So whatever, let's have a dance, but you don't speak anymore, please. My charity has come to its limits here. The iron tongue of midnight hath told 12. Lovers, to bed. 'Tis almost fairy time. I fear we shall outsleep the coming morn. Now note the change in diction here, by the way. If you note on the page, it begins with him not observing versification. The lines run one into the next. He's speaking to the commoner. Right? There he speaks to the commoner, and he speaks like a commoner. Having done that, he now addresses the rest of them, and now he switches back into the royal verse. The iron tongue of midnight hath told 12. Lovers to bed, 'tis almost fairy time. I fear we shall outsleep the coming morn. As much as we this night have overwatched, this palpable gross play hath well beguiled the heavy gate of night. Sweet friends, to bed a fortnight hold we this solemnity, in nightly revels and new jollity. And then he goes out, and Puck comes in. And if you've ever seen, what is that play or that story? Robin Williams does this, the Dead Poets Society. They put that play within it as well, which is interesting in the context of that, because that's about that whole story is about authority and misplaced authority. Remember, the father's an abusive man. He wants his son. He's going to rule him, and the son wants to be an actor, and the father's outraged by this. So they're playing on the themes there. I can talk more about that film, but let's not get distracted here. Puck comes in. And remember, Puck is a figure of discord to the very end. Delights in it. Now the hungry lion roars, says Puck, and the wolf behowls the moon, while the heavy ploughman snores, all with the weary task fordone. Now the wasted brands do glow, whilst the screech owl, screeching loud, puts the wretch that lies in woe in remembrance of a shroud. Now it is the time of night that the graves, all gaping wide, every one lets forth his sprite, in the churchway paths to glide. And we fairies that do run by the triple Hecate's team from the presence of the sun, following darkness like a dream, now are frolic. Not a mouse shall disturb this hallowed house. I am sent with broom before to sweep the dust behind the door. Now he's speaking of triple Hecate's team. These are dark images. Triple Hecate would be Satan. It's a satanic image. It's a dark image. Now it's fairy time, the witching hour. The spirits are out. Then the king and queen come back in. Not Theseus and Hippolyta, now it's Oberon and Titania. He speaks, through the house give glimmering light, by the dead and drowsy fire. Every elf and fairy sprite hop as light and bird from briar. And this ditty after me sing, and dance it trippingly. So he calls for song and music and dance. And this would be with a wedding feast, right? But it's also a representation of the heavenly celebration, of the Trinity. You could talk about it as a perichoresis, even if you want to look that up. The three figures of the Trinity in an eternal dance, a celebration. Oberon calls for that. Titania, first rehearse your song by rote. To each word a warbling note, hand in hand with fairy grace, will we sing and bless this place. And now they sing and they dance, the fairies. Oberon, now until the break of day, through this house we fairies stray, to the best bride bed will we, which by us shall blessed be. And the issue there create, so the fairies will produce offspring, ever shall be fortunate. So shall all the couples three ever true and loving be. And the blots of nature's hand shall not in their issue stand. Never mole, hair lip, nor scar, nor mark prodigious, such as are despised in nativity, shall upon their children be. So it's an unfallen nature. It's a nature that's unaffected by the fall.
Is it unaffected or is it perfect?
It's been purged of, it's been healed, restored. It's a restored creation. With this field do consecrate. Every fairy take his gate, and each several chamber bless. Through this palace with sweet peace, and the owner of it blessed, ever shall in safety rest. Trip away, make no stay. Meet me all by break of day. That's the conclusion from Oberon. It was in rhyming couplets, very harmonious, and not just in the form, but in the content of the speech. But he's not the last word. And that's interesting. Shakespeare does not conclude with the very tight and very happy ending of Oberon pronouncing that the offspring of these three marriages will be without defect of sin. Again, this is not a story of natural love. This is a story, it's a picture of heavenly love. That's what he's trying to demonstrate here. Different types of love. This is the love that only God can create. But they all three go out, and Puck is left alone on stage. And now Puck does something that later critics will say is breaking through the third wall. He comes out, and he comes right up to the front of the stage, and he addresses the audience, speaks to them. Up to this point, the players speak to one another, but they don't actually acknowledge the audience as an audience. Now he does. He breaks through not the third wall, the fourth wall, which is the invisible wall between the audience and the actors, and acknowledges it as a work of fiction thereby, and that this was a play. It always was, but they recognize this because now that he's spoken to, and he'll look down at them and look around at them and see the faces, and he says, if we shadows have offended, think of this, and all is mended. See, note that they're rhyming couplets. That you have but slumbered here, while these visions did appear, and this weak and idle theme, no more yielding but a dream. Gentles, do not reprehend. If you pardon, we will mend. And, as I am an honest Puck, if we have unearned luck, now to 'scape the serpent's tongue, we will make amends ere long. Else the Puck a liar call, so good night unto you all. Give me your hands, and he'll do this. They always, as if the audience didn't understand, give me your hands. Like, of course it's clapping. You don't have to, like, anyway. Give me your hands if we be friends, and Robin will restore amends. So that's how it concludes, with the conspicuous artifice of the play being recognized by the actor who plays Puck, and again forces the audience to think about how does a play relate to their lives. Because they're supposed to come out of there changed, better, having been taught. That's how it finishes. And Puck will finish that here. Your thoughts. We've got a couple minutes here. Comments, observations, reflections on how it might relate elsewhere. I happen to think that this is what art can do. I am in accord with Shakespeare and the Renaissance view of drama that good art, good theater, good poetry, a good novel can change people. And it is a divine sort of working that, of course, the work of God can do through the preaching of his word, but also in artistry. The goodness, the beauty, the truth represented there draw people. It changes them. And I think that's why people don't want to give up reading. They continue to be attracted to good work like Shakespeare's play. But that was me speaking, and your thoughts. I speak a lot. I get paid to do that, I guess. No? Well, then our revels here are ended. And I will see you then next time. Measure for Measure we will read. I will also then talk about what I said I was going to speak about, the instructions for the playing of the plays, which are right here, and the acting of the plays, etc. But I will put that up online. This is it here. Notes on acting. And I'm happy to meet with the groups. I'll send you notes about how many groups. I don't even know how many we've got in the class, but there's probably going to be 3, at most 4 groups. And I'll give you more directions then. Okay? And I'll see you then.